We'll start with this. Of course, obviously, what happens in the second coming, what happens when I die, that's what we're going to be looking at. I want to start by telling you this chart and these graphics that I'm using, the material is not my own. That's the original chart that I wish I knew where I got it. You can tell it's handwritten, and somebody spent a lot of time on that particular chart. It's been in my files since before I ever decided to be a preacher. So it's been that long, about 1,000 years since this was in my files. So I can't give credit to whom credit's due for this. So all the information you're going to see is from that original chart and the way that it's put together, and we're going to talk about the way it's put together in a minute. I've redone it once since I've been here at Pikes Peak, and that's what it looked like. I'm just thankful for PowerPoint now that we can make it in color and all of those things for that. This first one that we had here obviously was in black and white, and I finally got to use it in an overhead projector. Remember those? And then this one, it was in color. I didn't print it in color on this because I just scanned the copy I had. Until I discovered PowerPoint, when they came out with slides that you could print on your inkjet printers and make color overhead transparencies, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven then. And then when I learned about PowerPoint, it was even better. So those are kind of the iterations. So the information, the organization of it's mine. I put it together this way and in this order, but the information is something that I borrowed from somebody else. But let's talk about some introductory things before we get too far in the charts. Number one, I think this is at best, we'll call it a reasonable explanation. There's so much about this, and we'll say this in a minute, so much about this that I don't think we can know for sure. And so I'm presenting this to you for your consideration, not as the official Pikes Peak Church of Christ doctrine on what happens when I die, but for your further study, for you to think about and to look at. And if you disagree with something on here, you're probably just as right as you can be about that. And we're not going to fuss and fight about that because we're trying to just get a general idea here of perhaps what happens when we do die. What this is a combination of scriptures from the entire Bible. Ecclesiastes, Psalms, Genesis, all the way into the New Testament. So there's not one place in Scripture that gives us all this information, kind of like Paul did in 1 Thessalonians. When the Lord comes again, this and this is going to happen. He doesn't do that anywhere in Scripture where he gives us the whole picture. And so we're piecing it together from selected passages throughout the Old and the New Testament. And sometimes when you do that, you may be taking things perhaps out of the context of what they were meant and trying to apply them here. We don't want to do that, but sometimes that could be the process. And here's why. Some verses may not have been written as a mile marker in what happens when I die, but rather just a general description. The author wasn't trying to say, okay, put this on your checklist for when you die. This is what's going to happen. He's just talking about, for example, Ecclesiastes 12, where he talks about when we die, the body returns to the dust, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. I don't think Solomon there was trying to give us a list, okay, this is what happens when I die. He's reminding them, okay, this body is temporary, it's going to go to dust, you're going back to God. And that was the message that he was dealing with there. So, yes, we've included that verse in our study because it's relevant. But again, that may not have been Solomon's. That wasn't the top thing on his mind that he was explaining the entire death process when he wrote that scripture. I think he probably had something else in mind when he was talking about that, and that may be true for others. Here's another thought. It's a description in physical words and understanding of a non-physical plane of existence. Think John's description of heaven that we have in Revelation. John is trying his best to describe to us a spiritual place that can't be described in physical terms. And so when he talks about the foundation stones being out of these precious gems and the gates of pearl and the streets of gold and the city four square, I think he was doing his best from what he was allowed to see to describe that in physical terms. And I think we need to understand that probably that can't be described in physical terms the way that we think. Or maybe that was how God communicated the spiritual to him in a physical way so that he could write about it. But we know that the spirit world and the physical world are two different entities. And the physical world is going to be burned up and gone and everything in it. And we're going to be in a spiritual world. And what's that be like? What's that going to be like? Well, I have no idea. I have no idea. I wish I did, but I don't. And I won't claim to have any idea. So let's keep that in mind as we go through this process of talking about what happens when I die. And then there's the consideration of time. I'm a Star Trek fan, and they're always getting messed up in time. They go to the future. They go to the past. Somebody comes from the future to the past and messes up the whole time continuum and all of that. And we're so used to time, we don't really even think about it. But we know that, how does God measure time? What does it say about him? A day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is a day. So time probably has no meaning in that spiritual world where we're going. And so our chart here that you see going through is based on a continual process of one event after another, after another, after another, in time. Because we understand that. Because we live by time. We can't think hardly about anything else but time. And so here's the conundrum, okay? So I die at a point in time, and I leave this physical realm. If there is no time there, then couldn't judgment be simultaneous? Could be. Or God could continue that time limitation even in the spiritual world until such time as his time here on earth matches up with the time, so-called time in the spiritual. Now, if your head's starting to hurt thinking about that, yeah, mine is too. So, again, what I'm trying to say is let's don't make too much of this. Hopefully it will be an encouragement to you to think about and see it put in a graphic form like this. But we've got to understand that we're dealing with things that are beyond our ability and our realm of understanding. And here's the main point I want to make. We really don't need to know the mechanics of what will happen. All we need to know, in parentheses, trust, is that God promised to take care of everything. And that comes from 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, our study. And so if you look at this and say, well, this doesn't make sense to me, don't worry about it. God's got it covered. Or you look at it and this makes perfect sense to me. Good. God's got it covered. And you look at it and it makes perfect sense to you, and then when you die and it's not anything like that, don't worry about it. God said he'll take care of it. And so let's keep that in mind as we go through this particular timeline that we've put together, and give us some indication of maybe the mechanics of it. But if it's not completely accurate, then again we trust that God will take care of everything, and that'll be it. And we don't have to worry about that, because I kind of think God knows what he's doing, don't you? And so I think he will take care of that, those particular things. All right, any questions, thoughts, comments about that? Yes, Steve.
I have something that I want to bring out, and if this doesn't meet the lesson, that's fine. But Mark 6, verse 49, and they were speaking about Jesus. They said that when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and they cried out. And I mean, I've heard it said that people use this to suggest that people were not, upon death in Hades. Mm-hmm. And so it's always kind of a scripture that, wondered, like, what is this really?
Okay.
In relation to this?
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we get a little further in our lesson about that. And again, I'm going to promise you I don't have an answer for it, so just so you're ready. Redempta.
It seems that John just actually comes to the earth to get description of words that we can understand.
Yes.
To describe heaven. It may not be anything like that.
Right. He uses words we understand, yes, and words that are appropriate in our sphere of existence to express the grandeur of what's going to be in that sphere of existence. But again, did he hit the mark? Probably as best he could. I kind of have the impression, and this is my personal opinion, that when we get to heaven, we're going to look at it and say, boy, John, you missed the mark by a mile. And because it's going to be so grand. But again, that's for us to find out someday, not today. John?
I was thinking about what is our part in preparing and getting ready for
Right.
the second coming. Probably all the adults here at one time have had surgery, the kind of surgery where they knock you completely out and you wake up in the recovery room a few hours later. What's our role in that operation?
Right.
We don't know what happened, we don't know how time went by, but we wake up and there we are again. So maybe we just wash our bodies with that smelly soap they give you, and we show up in the operation and we don't do anything after that. So maybe in the same way we need to live a holy life and just wait for it to happen.
I think that's an excellent point. In fact, we can just quit there and not talk about it anymore, because that's really one of the best explanations I've heard. When you go into surgery, you get ready for that surgery. You quit eating, you quit drinking, you do all that stuff. You shower with that soap, and then you rub this junk on your body. And then you get into the waiting room, and in the operating room, and they said, "We'll see you when it's over," and that's the last thing you remember. Could death be like that? It happens. We're in the operation. We wake up where we need to be. Could be that. I like the sound of that. And however long, if we're going to stick with time, that is from my death to them. Again, that's up to God. Flo?
Well, no, even though we trust and believe that God will take care of all things, go back to Johnstown, we have a role to play.
Yeah.
We have a part to play, and we can have a false sense of security. Yes, God will take care of everything, and we don't do our part by preparing ourselves when He comes, living a life every day that He wants us to live. Mm-hmm. And so we can't just say, well, God, I'm not going to worry about it, I have nothing to do, He'll take care of everything. That's a false sense of security.
Sure. Yeah. Flo makes a good point that it's about our preparation for that. Again, once they hit you with that anesthesia, as you know, because of previous colon cancer, I have to have a colonoscopy every year. And I tell Kelly, I'm going to fight that stuff this time. I'm going to stay awake as long as I can. And so I'm in there and they say, okay, here it comes. And I'm fighting, and then I wake up in the recovery room. There's just no fighting it. But it's our preparation again. And that's what Paul was talking about. There were some people who had quit living and working in Thessalonica because they were waiting for the coming of the Lord. And Paul said, no, you keep working with your hand. You earn what you need to do. You take care of things. You keep loving and living until the Lord comes again. And that means for the rest of your life, for their case, and maybe for the rest of our lives in our case. You keep loving and living. So it's that preparation, because once we hit that point of death, it is completely out of our hands and completely in God's hands. Redempta? Keep on keeping on, absolutely. Yes, Rudy.
Our physical person doesn't know what heaven is like, but our spiritual, it knows. Mm-hmm. It's just a matter of getting back there. And our spirit won't be surprised because it came from there.
Right.
It's trying to get back home.
Yeah, but the physical will be left behind because it has no place there. Yes. Right. So that's why we've been given the Spirit. When God breathed into Adam's nostrils the breath of life and gave us that Spirit, and we'll talk more about spirit and soul and all that in just a few minutes, that's what made it possible for us to live with Him for eternity. We're living in this, Corinthians calls it a tent. And if this tent is destroyed, then we have a building from God, a house not made with hands in the heavens. And so that's what we're looking for. But again, this is nice. The study is nice for our sake of curiosity and maybe getting a better handle on what we think is going to happen. But it is not necessary for your salvation. What is necessary is you living and working as Paul told the church in Thessalonica to do. Live your faith, love each other, take care of each other, spread the gospel, all of those things. And that way, when that comes, whenever it comes, you'll be all right. All right? Other thoughts or comments before we jump any further? All right. It starts with death. And you don't have to raise your hand, but how many of you are a little fearful of death? Some of you.
It's the part that comes before.
Okay, it's the part that comes before death. Whatever it is that kills you. All right, that's kind of what we worry about. I've heard people say, "Oh, I don't fear death. I'll never fear death. It'll be great," and maybe that's true. But I think for all of us, there is a certain amount of, what's the right word, trepidation about it. I mean, yes, we know and we believe and all of that stuff. But at the same time, there's that process of death that's kind of a mystery to us. And like John said, what gets us there is kind of troublesome, because not all of us are going to go peacefully in our sleep. It may be cancer. It may be some other disease. It may be a car crash, an airplane crash. We just don't know what's going to happen at that point of death. And so for me to say, and I'll speak for myself because I can't speak for you. For me to say, yeah, I'll say there's a little trepidation about it. Yes, I'm confident that I'm living my life, but that means, back to Flo's comment, that I need to be careful about that and not just, okay, I'm good to go. I've got my golden ticket. I don't have to worry about it. That's not what we're talking about. So we need to be careful about that and make sure, again, we're walking in the light as he is in the light, as John said, and be ready for that and not take it for granted that just because I'm a Christian that it's going to work out for me. I need to be working on that every day of my life and thinking about that every day of my life. And so death for me can be a thing of, okay, I'm ready to go meet the Lord. And you've known of people in this congregation who have died who have just had that attitude. We have some living right now, and you probably know who I'm talking about, who are ready to go and kind of frustrated that they haven't yet. Vanita Neeson, she is, for a long time, she's been ready to go, and she's tired of it here. And so you've got that mindset of, okay, there's something better for me, something better than what I'm doing right now, and I want to be there, but I've got to wait on God's timing for that to happen. And so that death thing, it starts out with that death, and that's a big unknown and a big concern and a big worry and a big, in some cases, fear of that. And, it's, there are a lot of people who think that when you die, that's just it. There's nothing afterward. You just, in a sense, cease to exist. And then there's all sorts of other beliefs of, reincarnation, and we're not going to go into that per se in the study. Things of that nature, that you come back as, as a higher being if you were good, and if not, you come back as a dung beetle or something if you were a really bad person. And so there's all those concerns about death. But again, Christianity has given us a vision of what happens when I die that is based on our acceptance of Jesus, our living our life here, and the reward for doing that when we get to heaven. Gwen?
I've heard some say, when you die, you're dead all over, just like born.
Yep, absolutely. So, we didn't get very far in this at all today. But that's all right. We'll get next week, and we'll take as long as we need to get through this. But hang on to your sheets. If you happen to lose one, we'll have more copies next week. But appreciate your participation this morning. Thank you.